Okay, greetings, hello. I'm Dr. Thomas Daffier. I'm here to talk a bit about this Interfaith Peace Treaty that I've just authored with the inspiration and help of a number of colleagues. I think the world is facing a pretty critical time at the moment, isn't it? Especially in the Middle East, and especially in relation to interfaith relations. There seems to be a difficulty at the moment. There's a mismatch between our secular peacemaking institutions, such as the European Union, other political mediation projects like the United Nations and so on, their inability to deal with religious dimensions of conflict and violence. Now, this is something that I've studied and worked at for many years. I worked as a senior interfaith activist and representative in the 90s with a number of the world's leading interfaith organisations. I was Secretary General of the World Conference on Religion and Peace for 10 years, which is the main interfaith peace organisation on the planet, which took me to Rome, the Vatican. I met Pope John Paul II, who hosted a meeting in the College of Cardinals. And I met most of the leading players in the interfaith community. I then took 10 years out to do a PhD on the theory behind interfaith peace work, because we watched in horror as the Balkan War started, and again it had a religious dimension, but the faith leaders were nowhere to be seen actually resolving the problem. And the political leaders, the Milosevic's and the Blairs and Bushes and so on, were not. It's as if they're institutionally incapable of actually making peace, because they're commanders-in-chief. They're essentially warlords, and they have a duty to win victories, and all they can think of is bombing and NATO and violence. However, the complex interfaith realities of the world are much more sensitive and nuanced than that. I watched in horror as the Iraq bombing started in 2003 and the destruction of Saddam Hussein, which has led to complete and total chaos in Iraq, and now it's spread over into Syria, and we have total mayhem going on in the Middle East. In Afghanistan, the NATO-led interventions has not brought peace, and we still have killing and fighting going on there. So the complex interfaith community will never find peace if we leave it just to the politicians. This is my basic first point of my message. I've met interfaith leaders and religious leaders from every religion on the planet at very, very senior level for a large number of years. And in my PhD thesis, which looked at these quests for peace from 1945 to 2001, I've come to the view that it is possible to get harmony between the different religions. There is a metaphysical, a philosophical, a psychological basis on which we can reconcile Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, paganism, Jainism, Shintoism, Sikhism, and so on, all the great religions. Now, I worked for 10 years as a religious studies teacher, as my friends and students know, in the secondary school sector, and developed this periodic table of the world's religions, which is the kind of blueprint that I'm operating from as an interfaith peacemaker. This is the first time that anyone has actually put every single philosophical and religious tradition into a basic table format like Mendeleff's periodic table of the elements. Now, I'm arguing that for spiritual literacy on this planet, we're dying because of lack of spiritual literacy. We're quite good at chemistry, we've got lots of engineers, we've got lots of mathematicians, we've got people that can do human resources work, that have all the correct speak for business and so on. What we are dying from on this planet is complete ignorance when it comes to spiritual literacy. At the most, some people know a bit about some of these boxes. If you're born into a particular faith, you'll learn about it, you'll die in it. And it's presented sometimes by religious leaders as if it's a package. You receive, you get it, oh, I'm an X. And then you don't question. You're in the box, you stay in the box, and that's where you live for the rest of your life. What I'm trying to say as a philosopher, and a philosopher of religion, is, that's like, human beings are incredibly complex. If you want to know how many atoms and elements make up a human body, I can assure you it's the full range, virtually, of the periodic table of the elements. I have carbon in me, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, trace metals, all kinds of complex elements. That's what makes life possible. Life is complex. So the same with our spiritual nature, right? Most people I've met have a complex mixture of beliefs, and that's exactly as it should be. We permeate from one to the other in our lives. When I talk to my Japanese colleagues of peace studies, they say to me, Thomas, every single Japanese person is partly Buddhist and partly Shinto. And now they may be partly Kantian, or they may be partly Marxist, or they've adopted Western ideas, they may be Freudian or whatever. It's a complex mixture. And they look at the West with this mono literacy concept that you have to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew and you're locked in an eternal battle. They look at it with perplexity and they say, no, Buddhism teaches a much more sophisticated way of thinking. And in Japan it's taken as read that you're partly Shinto, i.e. pagan, and partly Buddhist, i.e. you've accepted the revealed religion that came to Japan in the 8th century. So, as a very start point, I would argue that all the parts of the Middle East and Europe and elsewhere which have revealed religions, such as Christianity and Islam, which have spread out from particular revelatory sources, they also all have indigenous traditions there. They were Druid, they were pagan, they were ancient Greek, Hellenistic religion, the ancient religions of Babylonia, Sumeria, Phoenicia, and ancient Arabia. These go back a very, very long way, right to the beginning of pre-Neolithic civilization, prehistoric times. If you look at the latest work by Professor Witzel of the University of Harvard, he's explained how the core myths of mankind go back to about 200,000 BC. There's a common core stock of myths that all the religions have descended from. It's the hero myth, the prophet who brings wisdom, and who works for the god or the goddess, and then goes through difficulty, is reborn, and saves the people. That's one of the core myths. It's transmuted into the Messiah myth, and I recommend Witzel's book as an overview. It's the first time it's ever been attempted. But what he hasn't been able to do is go into the complexity of the story. So anyway, I worked in the 90s. I created a thing called the Multifaith and Multicultural Mediation Service, which some of my friends and colleagues know about, which I operated and ran from London. I was working with a number of interfaith groups, and the concept was we would mediate different religious disputes. It was unique. Nobody else had thought of it. I did it after the experience of going to the Vatican, meeting 900 religious leaders from all over the planet, and realizing they didn't know what to do about the horrible religious conflicts that were raging in the Balkans and the Middle East. I realized in horror they literally did not know how to get from their place of being a dogmatic proponent of X, theologically, to unpick that position and go to a place of embracing the other in peace. One of the problems is that if you're a representative, a leader, a religious leader of one of the great faiths of mankind, and you're seen to be too embracing the other, you're accused of heresy. So there's an inbuilt sociological pressure in all the religions to conform to some model of orthodoxy that tends to be much more hardline and conservative. So the people that rise to the top in religions are often the ones that say, go kill them, they're the enemy. That oversimplify thought to a black and white Machiavellian kind of Manichaean, we're right, they're wrong, chop the heads off. This is such a gross assault on human intelligence. As a philosopher of religion and a philosopher of peace, what I'm arguing here in this Interfaith Peace Treaty is we have to declare peace on our own imaginations. People are so much more complex than that stupid narrative of we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, let's kill them. We played that out in World War II. Millions of people died. Millions of people went into concentration camps or gas ovens. Let's not replay the nonsense that came out of that dualism. With the founding of UNESCO, the founding of the UN at the end of the war, we pledged as a mankind, as a humanity, we will never repeat this error. And there's enough weapons on the planet now, we all know, nuclear weapons. Some of them are stored opposite this castle in a huge mountain. We can't afford that simplistic, over-dualized way of thinking. We have to go to the recognition of complexity. This is what quantum theories about. This is what physics has found. Even the elements that we thought were coherent, you break them down into tiny little quarks, they keep popping in and out of nowhere, as the latest physics has found. So what I'm saying is we need to update our thinking in spiritual literacy. So the periodic table gives us a way of reconciling the different religious traditions and streams and currents of mankind. We have the pagan primal religions, the Chinese-based religions like Taoism, Confucianism, the Buddhist religions, and all the varieties, Theravada, Mahayana, and so on, Tantric Buddhism. The different forms of Judaism. Again, it's a complexity. There's no one kind of Orthodox Jew. There's conservative, liberal, Reformed, Samaritan, Karaite, Kabbalist, Hasidic. They're all on the table. And they're all valid from their own perspective. It's not a value judgment, this table. It's a scientific tool. I'm not saying which of these boxes is right. What I'm saying is we, mankind, operate and have co-created the entire table. We now have to learn to live together and declare peace on each other. And the point of the Interfaith Peace Treaty is that there should be a formal declaration of peaceful intent by the responsible religious leaders of each of these traditions on the planet. So the leaders of the Jewish groups, the Buddhist groups, the pagan and primal groups, the Chinese, all the different varieties of Christian. These are all the light blue boxes. There's loads of them. Anglican, Episcopalian, Roman Catholic, all the different orders within the Roman Catholic Church, Franciscan, Dominican, Jesuit, they all have their own autonomy and their own intellectual contribution to make. I think they're all incredible. And I would like to invite the leaders of all the different orders and groupings to sign the Interfaith Peace Treaty. And the bishops, archbishops, cardinals, and so on. Then we have the various Hindu groups. Again, those that are dedicated to Shiva worship, to Vishnu and to Brahma, the Gandhian groups, all the subtle nuances in India. It's interesting, the Shankara tradition, which gives us Advaita Vedanta, they have these 4 Shankaracharyas in India. So they're like the Pope of Hinduism, 4 of them. So, they should sign this. But we also have the Ramanuja tradition of recognizing the necessity to retain distance between the soul and the absolute, the beloved. And the Ramanuja tradition have helped bring this Interfaith Peace Treaty into being. Then again, we have all the different Islamic groups, the Shia, the Sunni, the Ismaili, the different categories and groups of Islam. Again, all of them can sign this. And what they're doing is they're committing by signing it. If you look at the actual wording of the treaty, and this is now available in a public format on the web, if you look at the wording very, very carefully, it's a commitment to ongoing scholarship. It's a commitment to replacing the sword by the pen. Let us go back to the fruits of the European Enlightenment were very, very hard won. Here in Europe, we experienced civil wars for several hundreds of years. We had Catholics and Protestants fighting over religious interpretations and dogmatism. This led to a huge, great civil war called the 30 Years' War in Europe, which was the most devastating struggle. In England and Scotland and Wales, it became the civil wars of Britain, where extreme Protestants fought, Catholics and Anglicans. And eventually, we realised that rather than going on with these religious wars, we should have an agreement to differ. We needed some kind of philosophical framework whereby we can respect each other's different views and try and use reason, argument, evidence, develop some kind of social science and Geisteswissenschaft in German, the spiritual sciences, and developments in psychology worked alongside that. People like Jung came along and realised that spiritual experience is a universal trait in human nature. And Ken Wilber and other transpersonal psychologists have now realised that we can map the different insights of the prophetic lineages of mankind. There need be no rivalry between the truths that different traditions have come up with. So the periodic table, it's all valid from the historical and cultural time of the recipients. What I'm saying now, and I think I'm voicing this on behalf, I hope, of the large majority of humanity, is that we now have a chance for the first time in the history of this planet for all of us to access all the wisdom traditions of all mankind, instead of having to stay in your little block and be in your narrow little confine, we have a birthright to what Teilhard de Chardin called the Homo Noeticus. We can discover our common wisdom, our common universal intellect, and see, like Hegel and the great philosophers of the 19th century said, how the universal spirit plays out in all these different traditions. And it's not a rivalry to the death, it should be a cooperation towards enlightenment. So anyway, all of this is what underpins the work I've been doing for the last 30, 40 years of intense research. You can read my books. I've given talks about this publicly, and we'll be continuing to do that to the last breath I breathe. I only just pray and hope that enough responsible philosophical intellectuals, religious leaders, cultural intellectuals from each country and each faith tradition will sign this peace treaty. And it's like a declaration of peace that we, the followers of X tradition, will not attack followers of Y tradition or Z or whatever. We unilaterally declare peace because that is what the Spirit calls us to do. Now, I've had some very, very positive feedback, people wanting to sign this from many, many different faith perspectives and many intellectual perspectives. From the Jain tradition, which has inspired me a great deal, and Jain thinking has gone into my work over the last 20 years. There's this notion of Anikant-Vada. There's a multiple coexistence of apparently diametrically opposed truths, which coexist. Now, Kant called it the antinomies of reason. You can't comprehend from one perspective alone absolute truth. You have to find a multi-perspective way of thinking. This is what Jean Gebser, the great philosopher of the 20th century, said. It's what Ken Wilber's work on transpersonal theory point to. And it's what my own work in my PhD on transpersonal history point to. Gaia, the planet, it's simultaneously day and night from Gaia's perspective. It's simultaneously really cold at the poles and really hot in the desert regions. It's raining and it's dry. It's desert and it's ice. So from Gaia's perspective, it's simultaneous coexistence of opposites. And Gaia keeps her act together by enjoying that multipolarity, that multidimensionality of being. And in my philosophical work on being and knowledge, I've gone into this in very great detail, a kind of ontology of complexity, which underpins the theory of peace. So I'm really just appealing, as coordinator of International Philosophers of Peace, which is a network we've met in America, in Russia, in Europe, and we the philosophers of the world are saying to all my brothers and sisters, whatever faith hat you wear, whatever colour or creed, whatever country you're from, let's show it's possible to agree to disagree in a harmonious and civilized way. Don't abandon your beliefs, but argue them rather than shooting and killing for them or dying for them. Martyrdom is a fool's gold. True martyrdom means bearing witness, and bearing witness to truth. The real martyr is the one that bears witness to truth, not the one who deliberately goes out and kills other people to prove that he's right and they're wrong. This is Kali Yuga kind of activity, and we have to grow out of Kali Yuga and remember truth, Sat Yuga, that we are supposed to be human beings. We are noble, dignified beings. Our human rights are God-given. It's not sort of secular human rights versus religious rights. The reason we have human rights is because we have this spiritual core, and we all do. So we recognise that. Therefore, we need to elevate our discourse to one of peaceful disagreement and, university seminars rather than killing camps, torture rooms, and the bestiality that's going on. So anyway, there's my appeal. Please read the Interfaith Peace Treaty. If you want to sign it, send me an email. I'll add your name. If you can speak on behalf of a religious organisation or an intellectual community or a faith group, the thing is completely open. And I would seriously invite you to add your name to this and spread the word. This is good news. If you read it, the long-term goal is to get a peace tent on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, to open the Golden Gate, to let the religious leaders of the planet play a role in manifesting the collective Messiah. As Krishnamurti said, the collective Messiah is the higher consciousness that we all carry. And so it's time we actualize that, rather than trying to monopolize our own strategy to that. A lot of the people fighting on the planet think they're doing the right thing. Many people from my own country, Britain, are going to fight in Syria and Iraq for ISIL and so on. They believe they're fighting the war against the Antichrist. But the trouble is, as I said, the dualistic theology that this is premised on is far too simplistic. And what we should be doing is collaborating. There's a particular clause in the Interfaith Peace Treaty that addresses this matter. And let me just read that to finish, because it's an important one. Because there are some groups on this planet that say only God can sort the planet's problems out, and therefore all we can do is fight the last battle against the forces of darkness, which are always defined as the other, right? And some people say that yes, we should bring the battle on. This is a very Zoroastrian kind of concept. We should have the final battle, and the eschatology this is premised on is that God is going to destroy the bad people. Only the good people are going to be surviving, and bring that battle on. But the trouble with that theology is that it leads to the mass destruction of millions and millions of human lives, the destruction of the Earth's environment, the destruction of ecology, and from a humanistic, a spiritual, and a theological perspective, the thinking behind that is utterly and totally false, and I think needs exposing. And that's what the Interfaith Peace Treaty is doing. The Interfaith Peace Treaty is premised on the value of life and on the value of peace, and the value of authentic apocalypse, which is the gradual unfolding of wisdom and enlightenment on the planet. Apocalypse means unveiling. It's a Greek term. And Muhammad and other great seers and sages who've talked in apocalyptic terms, if you trace the origin back through the Kabbalah and through Christian mysticism, the origin of apocalypse is the unfolding ultimately of wisdom and enlightenment, which is exactly what the Buddhists, the Jains, the Hindus, the Rishis have been saying, and the Druids all along. It's the real story is we've got trapped in this violent illusion. We have to get back to the place of enlightenment and wisdom, and we need to help each other to do that. Okay, so the Interfaith Peace Treaty, it's just a tool, but I think it could be a potentially really good one. So I'd appeal to all the, as I say, spiritual leaders, intellectual leaders, and interfaith leaders to get behind it, sign it, promote it, publicise it, and let's just get on with this job. Let's reopen that Golden Gate, folks, okay? Thank you so much.